Hello and welcome to this new section. In this section, we are going to set up our users service. Now, this user service will consist of the buyers and the sellers. So it's just going to be used to manage our buyers and sellers. Now, just to point out, the buyers and sellers, it's not going to be complicated. The buyers also is not going to have too many features. We're just only going to have the request to get buyers from the database. Remember, whenever a user creates an account, they automatically become a buyer. And then we publish an event with the buyer data from the authentication service to the user service. And then on the user service, we send that data to the database. So we are going to use the users service to manage the buyer and the seller. Now, because of how less complicated the buyer and the seller service are, I decided to just have them together. But if maybe in a real application you want to build the buyers and sellers, or an application like this, it will make more sense to separate them into different services. Now, the users service features. Okay, before we talk about one thing you should note, the reason why I'm calling it users is because we have the buyer and the seller. Okay, if it were just only one type of user, it would have been called user service, but here I'm calling it user service because we have the buyer and the seller. Okay, so the user service, as I've said, we have the buyer and the seller. All users automatically, when they create an account, they become a buyer, and then once they are logged in and they verify their email, then they can create a seller's account. The buyer can communicate with the seller, and also a seller can also become a buyer. Okay, so they can communicate with other sellers, they can purchase gigs from other sellers. Okay, so this is just the basic idea of what we are going to implement, the buyer feature and the seller feature. Now, the user service API endpoints related to the buyers or the buyer is at this point. For the API gateway, communication with the front end, so front end to API gateway, this is the URL that we are going to use. So API gateway host :port/API/v1/gateway/buyer. Now the reason why I'm doing this is I'm going to separate them into their own services. Okay, so on the API gateway, the buyer will have a service file and the seller will have its own service file. It's still possible we can just add them into one, but I decided to split them. So the buyer will have its own service file, the seller will have its own service file. Also in the user service, the buyer will have its own service file and the seller will have its own service file. And these are the endpoints we are going to have. So for the buyer, it's just going to be getting the data from the database. In order for us to create, we are going to send a request or publish an event from the auth service. So when the user creates an account, we publish the event. We already created the method. We just need to listen or consume the message that is sent from the auth service. And then we are going to have an endpoint to get buyer by email. So it's going to be HTTP verb get. Then we're going to create a method that we can get buyer by current username. So this current username, we are going to get it from request.currentuser, then .username. And then buyer by username, we're going to use the same method. Okay, but this time we're going to pass the username as a param, as you can see right here. Okay, so these are just the endpoints we're going to create for our buyer. Now, if we go to the seller, now this is the front end to API gateway endpoint. Okay, this is going to be the base part. That we are going to set the base URL. It's going to be /seller. Okay, and then API gateway to user service host :port/API/v1/seller. And then for the seller, we're going to have a method seller by ID. Okay, so we are going to get seller by ID. It's going to be a HTTP get verb. Then we're going to get seller by username. Okay, so /username/:, then we pass whatever username right here. It's going to be HTTP get verb. And then we can get random sellers. Okay, so we want to get random sellers. Probably we want to display random sellers. Okay, so we are going to get the data using /random. Okay, HTTP get verb. And then to create a seller, remember that we are going to create a seller. We are first going to save to MongoDB, and then once it is created, we take that same data and then add it to Elasticsearch. That is the way I want to implement it. But these endpoints, getting the data, we are only going to get from Elasticsearch. We're not going to get from MongoDB, okay? So we are only going to get from Elasticsearch. And then we update data. So we're going to update the data on Elasticsearch and also possibly update it in MongoDB. And then we're going to create an endpoint to seed sellers. So we want to create sellers, we want to seed data. Then we are going to use this endpoint right here. Now note, for this, we are going to use MongoDB for the buyer, storing the buyer data and also the seller data. So these are the endpoints that we are going to create in the users service.